By the way, I'm Dave Grant. Marcus kind of gave me a quick introduction yesterday, Chief Revenue Officer for Fusion Sport. Thanks so much, everybody, for being here. One of my responsibilities is just everything to do with customers and prospective customers. And this is my first summit event. And I think it's just fantastic. And it's fantastic because of all of you that really make it a success. So, thank you, everybody, for being here and participating. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce the panel that we have up first. So the panel is Unlocking Human Potential. Dr. Marcus Colby, why don't you come on up? He's going to help facilitate. Marcus is one of our senior consultants. Has been with us probably quite a while now. What, 8 years?
No, not that long.
Okay.
5 years plus.
5 years? Well, it just seems like it because he's such an intelligent guy. So, but Marcus is going to facilitate the panel on unlocking human potential. We're looking forward to it. So we have a great, panel here. So first of all, let me introduce Adam Strang, who's with the Air Force Research Laboratory. Big round of applause. Yeah, right. There we go. Woo! All right, there we go. But all the way from Dayton, Ohio. Yes, gotta love it. So thank you. And next up, Fernando Montez. Yeah, thank you. All right, exercise physiologist from LA County Fire. So we got a good diverse panel here today. And then Jillian Bauer, all right, from US Ski and Snowboard. All right, she's a high performance director there. And then Joe Patterson, a man who needs no introduction, right? All right. CCDC, right, which is Combat Capabilities Development Center. So, and with that, I'll let you take it away.
Thank you very much, Dave. All right, so the panel today, we're going to get into unlocking human potential. Deutsch thought it was a good idea to maybe show some screenshots from last night. Just to be sure. So we did manage to get a few photos of everyone last night having a great time, which was good. But on that note, we will get into the panel today. So we've got a diverse kind of panel in the different kind of domains that we work in, which is really interesting. For today, we want to look into different, I guess, hacks in the human performance space. Challenge a few status quos in terms of what we think is useful in this space as well, and see what thoughts we have as a collective. So to kick things off today, where I want to kind of start essentially is looking at the most exciting, I guess, piece of technology or software in the human performance space. So we'll go around the table here. We've got Adam, if you want to kick us off, just from your perspective, what piece of technology or software excites you the most about the future of human performance and why?
I mean, the simple answer to that is Smart Speed. How did you guys let that thing go? Like, are you kidding me? I actually spent a good amount of time thinking about this question this morning, and I don't think there are any right now. I think there was a time maybe 6 or 7 years ago where there was a lot of invention going on in human performance technology. Air Force Research Lab was involved in it heavily. Things like sweat sensors, flexible electronics, and a lot of that stuff really hasn't made it to market. Implantables, actually, not metal implantables, but what they call synthetic scaffolding that your tissues, body tissue, can't tell the difference between the sensor and the tissue in your body. But those haven't made it to the prime time. And the other thing we've been locked in is like the digital or electronic sensors haven't really progressed much, right? So we're still just dealing with accelerometers and gyroscopes and infrared lights. And we haven't even seen upgrades in battery, right? So we're getting more efficient in our battery usage for things like wearables, but we're not like really extending the life a lot. So that seems like I'm poo-pooing everything. So I don't see a lot of invention. I do see a lot of refinement and what I'll call innovation happening. So what that means is how we're actually better utilizing that information to move forward. And the way that I've been thinking about it mostly is not that we're doing it well, but I've been thinking really heavily about how we're going to go back and look at some old methods that just need new tech applied to it. I've been spending the last month or two rereading research articles coming out of World War II, 50s and 60s, about how they developed things like the fitness tests we know in the military, or the presidential fitness test, where they would, hundreds and hundreds of people would go undergo these batteries of planks and push-ups and whatever, and they would run a factor analysis to see which ones were actually the most beneficial. And I think the last time I actually saw a factor analysis of this type in the physical domain was 1993 that I can find. And that means we've been ignoring this potential. And we have all these new tools, force plates, movement assessment. It's time to go back and do that. Right now we see domains of performance. Who's defining those domains? Just the SMEs, no offense. I know there's a lot in the room. There's no theory, and there's not even any statistics to back up your division of domains into physical or cognitive, or separating cognitive into cognitive and psychological. And I think we just need to be a little bit more diligent about that. And we have the tools now at our disposal, like statistical tools and all these great analysis. We just need to get serious and systematic about its evaluation again.
Absolutely. And just to your point around, I guess, some of these inventions or new kind of methods, why do you think they haven't got to market? So let's say embedded wearables or different sweat patches or whatever that may be. What's your thoughts on why that hasn't got to market today?
Because there's no consumer market, right? So look at this room. This room's all driven by team outputs, efficiencies of the team, and the effectiveness of the team, right? All the wearable market is driven by the consumer. There's no team investment anymore, right? So there's just pockets of team. But going back to that culture, how do we actually then help as a human performance, team-driven environment help shape the consumer market to get more of this teaming? So there's just not a team need per se. That's the reason why they haven't got the market, or there's not a consumer aspect to it.
Absolutely. Fernando, over to you, mate. What are you seeing kind of in the field or in the different research spaces that excites you technology-wise in human performance?
Well, one of the things that have to understand, my domain that I operate in is a little different than the athletic domain and the research domain. And there's two things that in the fire world that they pretty much let you know real quick. They don't like change, and they don't like the way things are right now. Other than that, we're golden. That's my world. Basically, the technology, we brought in some technology into the fire community. I'm very fortunate working with LA County that they've allowed the funding for research in some areas like that, where we have active participants in labs, especially in our wildland division. We've been able to exploit some of the technologies to monitor hydration, using Omega Wave to monitor their readiness and stuff like that. And more importantly is to educate the members of our staff or cadre, because that's the real challenge right there, is how do you take technology and dumb it down to the level where the person that's actually at the farthest point from you can actually put it into application. So a lot of this is constant communication and understanding what we're getting in our data collection, and then being able to turn that back into operational capabilities and understanding, especially in the recruit training environment or wildland training.
Absolutely. Thank you. Gillian, I get the odd email from Gus occasionally thinking that he's come up with this new great idea. So hopefully you can give us some insights to some of those discussions that you have internally. But what are you seeing from a ski perspective that excites you?
Is that on? Okay. New to this. Gus is here. We're going to point that question to him at the end about technologies. I think for us, one of the big things at the moment really is just exploiting Smartabase, like to sound blatantly inauthentic in a Smartabase conference. Being able to create that data lake of all the different wearables. And, we have 5 different sports in our organization that have totally different goals, totally different sport demands. So the ability to bring all of those different metrics into one place and be able to investigate, what's coming out of all of those technologies, I think is the most exciting part. I think we've also, similar to Georgia, done a huge review and reintegration of our departments, which, that is allowed to succeed mostly by a platform like that encourages that integration and interaction and communication. So.
Absolutely. That's good for us. That's good news. I guess from just to add some sugar on top, just from my perspective, some of the interesting things I've also been seeing, and I'm curious to get the panel's thoughts on this, is sound. So one thing that has come out recently with the Amazon Halo band is looking at measuring tone of voice, which we kind of had some discussions yesterday about culture and how do we objectify that? How do we actually take a measurement of that in an environment? And I think from my perspective, if we can capture the sound of the environment, so the inflection of tone, how people are talking with their peers, with their clients, with their athletes, service members, then maybe that's a potential way that we can quantify the actual culture, the mood in the environment, and what that can possibly look like. So, I don't know if anyone's kind of seen that new kind of device. It's very invasive, some people would say, because it's measuring sound, it's measuring it at all points. But I think that could be a really interesting kind of avenue for us to explore. Adam, comments?
Yeah, I'm trying to think about how much I can say here. About not quite a decade ago, I saw the first version of that style of technology. It wasn't in a wearable. It was in like a light outlet that you would put into your home. And they were just using machine learning at the time, but it was just acoustic sensors like you were describing. And they were pretty good at predicting like what the person was doing while they were in their house, right? Now, I'm going to assume that when we have Google Home and these other things, that technology is now embedded and they're taking it to the next level to put it in wearables. And I think what we're going to find in this specific area, this is my perception for the moment, is that that's a bridge too far for people. They don't like the risk of what's coming along with that versus the reward that you're describing, Marcus, right? So it's nibbling at the edges. We might find over time that that's just a cultural issue, that sort of goes away in another generation or now, but that's an intersection of where the technology is viable, probably at the moment with a little bit more oomph, but I'm not sure that there's going to be consumer demand or even public acceptance of that type of technology. But let me flip this one on you, because we asked this about innovation. And I think it's important because I was sort of nailing invention versus intervention or innovation earlier. I think it's important that we start looking at some of the markets around the technology that we've been talking about and think about how far we have come a little bit. So you can see things like in the strength and conditioning or the exercise prescription apps, their capabilities and their price point have started to consolidate over the last 4 or 5 years, where they were very diverse in the past. You can see the same thing that's happening around force plate technology, right? It became viable as a human performance tool just maybe 6 or 7 years ago when it was a research tool before then because of how costly it was. But now what you're seeing is a consolidation, at least amongst most providers or vendors, around the price point and the type of data that we want. What we're going to see next, I think, is going to be the movement screening technology doing this. So right now, most of it's optical or it's sensor-based, but the price point and the capabilities are really, really far, right? We have inexpensive capabilities that might be just a few $100. And I'm not going to name the vendors here, but we can go in and do a quick movement screen. We have other ones that are up to $150,000 to $200,000 with green screen backgrounds and the whole nine. And we're not really settled on what the right capability could be. And I love playing in that space as a researcher, but it's really, really hard for me to advise units to invest in them at the moment because it's an unsettled market with an unsettled capability with outcomes that we're not exactly sure of. So it'll be fun to watch how that develops in the next few years, I guess is the best answer I can give you about where I see interesting technology taking root.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Joe, your perspective on that?
So just going off of what Adam, I mean, right now we have this engineering innovation without need, right? Like how are the SMEs actually driving the companies to get there versus, again, the consumer market versus team, right? So we talked a little bit about movement screen. Jen Marcello brought up when is the appropriate periodization of that? How often do you assess? So until the community, right, with this community locks in their approach to understanding, whether it be an embedded assessment that we talked about this morning or a recognized unity of effort between the human performance community to basically fight back against some of these technologies that has this marketing push, right? So that fear of missing out, whether it be on the military or sport, is massive, right? So we as a community need to actually unify and push back on vendors.
Absolutely. All right, so to change lanes slightly. So I think as a collective, we all appreciate the basics of training, but from the unique aspects of your different environments, have you seen any unique kind of prep or training techniques utilized? And yeah, are you willing to share? Maybe starting with you, Jillian.
Sure. So I think we've all probably seen a lot of unique training methods that we may not think in the end is particularly effective. I think really when it comes down to it, though, if at this point on the rehab reconditioning side, if your team is not really incorporating neurocognitive training and sensory integration into every step of your rehab, I think that's probably a big miss at this point.
Absolutely. Fernando?
In the environment that I have to work with, I actually went backwards. We went back to old school methodology. Part of it is I'm dealing with the 71%ers that can't get in the military. They're the ones that show up at our door signing up to be firefighters. We have no age limits, which really hurts. So if you're an 89-year-old man who can come in and get through the system, you can get a job. Problem is how long you'll be there. In my situation, working for a large fire department, I have to play basically 4-level chess with every decision that we make because of strategic impacts throughout the organization, all the way to the workman's comp scenario, all the way down to the pipeline coming in. So all of this generates our philosophy based upon the population we have to work with. And unfortunately, the population that we have, the 71%ers, we have individuals that can't do a pull-up, can't do a push-up, can't even control their own body weight. And so we're saying, okay, but we expect them to throw a ladder. We expect them to drag somebody out of a burning building, but yet physically they're not there. So we've been back to the old methodology of old school PT. And in reality, COVID helped us because the positive side was we actually sequestered them, we fed them, which was a great impact for us. And then when it came to PT, we no longer could use the weight room. So we went outside and did old-fashioned calisthenics. But it was great because we were able to phase that into more aggressive athletic type training as they switched their training protocol. For example, the first 5 to 6 weeks, as we call basic, all they're doing is throwing ladders, throwing their breathing apparatus, dragging hose. That's a huge load. We wanted to make sure that our load in the PT section of it, or the development section, was very low, but it was more precise to development rather than just training. So again, it's driven by who we have to work with. They're going to basically kind of help direct the needs of that particular class, and then we go from there.
Interesting. Thank you. Adam?
I've been debating back and forth on this one as well this morning. I think there's a notion or a resurgence of a movement that periodization in training is dead. I'm sure you guys some are tracking this in the S&C world. This idea that you can have these periodized training blocks around different preparatory phases of your schedule, or recovery phases or competition phases for athletics. The same thing sort of happens on the military side with pre or post deployments or in deployment things. I actually don't think periodization is dead. I think periodization is lazy, and the providers are lazy right now. No offense to those who are out there. And let me describe to you why. So the periodization works, and I still think it's sound science. The trouble I think that people are having is that we need something. My colleague Mike was describing to me as fluid periodization, but I think of it as multi-scale periodization. So we've got multiple levels of it. Yeah, you can set your calendar for things in advance and have these general trends of where you want the loads to be if we're in a hypertrophy phase or recovery phase, whatever. But the truth of the matter is, like, stuff happens during your day, or you get sick, or you miss or something out. Or you went out and had a really good time last night, right? So how do we dynamically adjust on the fly to accommodate those real-time changes that are coming up without giving up, without breaking the periodization that we want to be in? And we're trying to figure out ways like HRV or sleep or whatever other technology for which to do it. But that's where I think the kind of interesting place needs to play right now, and where, when I say lazy periodization, I'm saying providers and researchers are not documenting or systematically taking that dynamic change seriously. And anytime that they do, so HRV is the classic case of using this, is that I'm not a believer that HRV really works all that well for on the individual level, because there's too many things that affect the autonomic nervous system to base your training off of that solely. The stress comes from lots of different sources that's affecting that. And so we get a lot of false positives and false negatives. And we get technology telling us that we need to be in a recovery phase when we feel fine, or vice versa. And the consequence of that is you lose trust in that technology. What we need to do is not to say that that idea was wrong, the idea to try to do something like that was right. It's on us to try to make that better and more precise. And I don't see a lot of us engaging in that seriously right now, which is a shame, because once we get that licked, then periodization will be more powerful than it's ever been before.
Interesting. I like it. Joe, any thoughts?
I'll just dovetail off what Adam said, because we have a very similar population. Like the Army is really hard, right? So on the periodization idea, like I've talked to others in the community, and they can see a better periodization like in country for sustainment, like during a deployed environment, because it is kind of more of a fixed, right? This is just generalizable knowledge. And then when you get back home, right, you have your family, you have your sense of belonging, you're going to do things. And then you have schools, right? You have to go to schools in the military to maintain proficiencies and then graduate through the education system that Colonel Beekelman showed yesterday. So everything becomes chaotic at the individual level, right? So it's not as predictable a schedule as you like. And we're also the military is like the service that trains the train, right? We have hours of PT, then we go to the range and we do some patrolling, and then we go home, right? So we look at that chronic load over time, right? And so that's really where we're trying to figure out like how all this, the ecosystem of HP fits in to understand the ebbs and flows in and out of a periodization cycle, so we can be more agile in the environment and actually meet the needs of the individual versus the populations in which research promote.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Can I comment a little bit on that?
Go for it, Fernando.
One of the differences also too is in my world, I have a 30-year slate. Think about that. When you're periodizing a program for an Olympic athlete, a collegiate athlete, or so on, we have a 30-year process. So I have a very limited time in the beginning of that process to start to basically cultivate. I'm a farmer at that point in time. I'm cultivating the weeds first and getting rid of them, and then gradually develop them. Then they're going to run into an issue called a union. And that plays a big component in all this process, because regardless of what we feel is the right direction, those factors play a big part in the decisions and what we can employ, what we can't employ.
Absolutely. I like the analogy. Okay, so to pivot slightly, so do a bit of reading actually. So this one I was reading about the other day. So a number of high-performing organizations, so Google, Pixar, SOF, have opened their own kind of mental performance labs that focus on things such as mindfulness and achieving states of flow as even part of their training. So I'll start with you, Adam. From your perspective, how do you value these specific efforts? So having dedicated facilities for mindfulness, developing flow state, and is this, in your opinion, a must-have for high-performance facilities kind of moving forward?
I value them highly. I'm a cognitive psychologist by background, just so that you guys know, an athletic trainer as well. But I don't think they're a must-have, and the reason is I think those techniques and skills have not proven clearly their return on investment, and they don't have clear, what I'll call KPIs, key performance indicators that would lead to those return on investments, and they don't have a clear credentialing route. And so we need to sort of establish those to give them legitimacy against the other sort of domains that we have in the pipeline right now. And that's just going to take some work, some time, some recognition that it's appropriate. So Jillian brought up earlier, and I was waiting to peg you on this, and I'm going to put you on the spot here. You said if you're in your rehab, if you're not in incorporating neurocognitive feedback and training, that you're really missing out today. Yeah. Who's implementing that for you? And I think I have an idea who the answer is. Is that appropriate for people like you and me, physical therapists and athletic trainers, really to be engaged in?
So I guess my response is, and maybe I wasn't clear on what I mean by neurocognitive rehab. I'm not looking at retraining of like in the neurological sense, where there should be a neurologist or a a neuropsychologist involved. What I'm talking about is the implementation of certain techniques along the lines of like contextual interference and motion variability as a change in how you apply your trade as a physical therapist. That also has to be incorporated then in your strength and conditioning program, so that we're not, I guess, the area it comes from, Dustin Groms out of Ohio University, is big in this space, right? And so he talks a lot about the changes in neuroplasticity post ACL. We've seen this quite a lot in our athletes, and you can see it, in different movement patterns, etc. The way we are applying it differently in the clinic is just a different approach to how we start from day one. We don't do a quad set that's just a quad set once they can fire that on their own anymore. It gets implemented into different techniques. We throw balls, we play card games, we do a variable warm-up instead of 3 sets of 10. We never do that anymore. We have them moving through different activities and exercises all of the time, which more mimic the contextual environment that they're going to be in when they're doing their sport. So our athletes, when they're flying down the hill at 70 miles an hour, 60 or 80 miles an hour, they have a ton of visual stimulation coming at them. If we put them in a PT clinic or in an athletic training environment where they have this narrow space to which they have to do these perfect squats 40 times, and then we move on and we block in another set of exercises, it really limits their ability to adapt in those environments. And so that's, I guess, how I'm approaching that. It's not so much that I'm trying to take on brain training, but I'm trying to access neuroplasticity or reduce the effect of those neuroplastic changes that happen post-injury. Does that make sense?
It does make a sense, and that's a clear distinction that I think is sort of within our lane of practice.
Mm-hmm.
I think the question that Marcus was after was a little bit more about specific cognitive skills, like relaxation techniques or getting into flow or imagery, and that's out of my lane. So that would be into the mental performance lane. The squishy part I see from the military side is that gets commandeered by clinical psychologists who are also licensed, but maybe outside their lane of practice of being experts in this fuzzy field of sports psychology or mental performance and enhancement techniques. And until that organization itself defines itself and kind of, again, shows its legitimacy, we have a hard time arguing to implement right now. Because the only way you implement right now in the military is you would have to tie it to something like brain health related to TBI or concussion or to suicide risk, other mental health issues. And that's not sufficient, and that's not even what they're there for, right? We're trying to enhance. Those are clearly clinical issues.
Interesting. Fernando, your thoughts?
I was back in baseball in the 90s when sports psychologists first started getting involved and embedded in pro teams, and it was taboo. Athletes would not even go in to see them, and if somebody did and somebody found it, they'd sneak into the back door, where now it's just part of the culture. In the fire world, we have a behavioral health program, but it's reactive. It's not proactive. And again, you got to talk about the window of opportunity in the beginning. So we're an extension of that process to teach mindfulness, or we call mind fitness. So we'll teach we call the big 4+4 performance routines. We're going to talk about stress inoculation, how to deal with whatever the particular stressor is of that day. The key is we control the environment, and it's huge because we know where that stress point is that day. And we might talk about breathing techniques. Let's practice this today. And at the end of the training session, we'll do, because they're going to weigh out on the end of the day, we're going to do a data dump on them and saying, what'd you think? Where did you have problems? Or we're talking about focus. What'd you focus on today? Today's an exam day, and the pressure's on, the stress is there. So we have an open opportunity early on to at least educate them to a point where they have that tool in the toolbox. And then when they get into the actual real world, where nobody calls a fireman when you're having a great day, right? They get impact of stress and stress and stress. So at least they have a tool, but more importantly is they feel confident to reach out and say, I need help. So again, we take every opportunity to teach that, and we're an extension of our psychological support system and used as a tool.
Fantastic, thank you. Jillian, just an extension of the rehab process. Are there any other kind of protocols that you're running in that kind of mindfulness space or educating on?
Yeah, we run a lot of sports psychology and mental wellness initiatives. I think it's become really, really popular and really on the forefront of everyone's mind, especially after Tokyo. Making sure that athlete mental health is addressed. I see mindfulness really as a foundation to both mental health as well as sport performance and mental performance. And we work with our sports psychologists on this a lot. So there's some basic skills that can help people develop in the mindfulness space that give them additional resilience, based on our work and really from our psychologists that are driving this. I think I value it a ton, and I think it makes more resilient people. And we don't focus on it entirely with just our athletes. We make sure that our staff, our coaches, everybody has that training so that when we all get into those stressful environments, that we're all better equipped to manage and move forward.
Absolutely. Thank you. Joe, what are you seeing in the military space?
So I'm not a domain expert, so I don't want to get called out by Adam. However, yeah, so it goes back to that culture conversation yesterday, right? Like the trust that this stuff works, depending on the practitioner who's administering, but it also has to be meet the culture. I think Duncan said it best, right? We beat the athlete, right? We actually go to them, we talk to them and understand what their buy-in is. And this is where you're gonna have to see the research community shift from population-based understanding to understanding like grams per kilogram associated with drug dosing, right? Because that's an individual piece, right? So we miss the individual variability that's associated with what the practitioners need at the individual level, right? Because they're making evidence-based decisions, or they're making evidence-led decisions with evidence-based knowledge on a population. So what Adam needs is different than what I need, Jillian, Fernando, like we all have different populations. But at the end of the day, we have to embrace the culture of that individual and then meet them there, and then give them the right dose, right? And move past this only generalizable knowledge across an entire population.
Hey, Colbs, I was thinking, what I hear from the mindfulness and the cognitive performance enhancement, it would really be nice. It wouldn't be sufficient, but if they were able to establish and publish more protocols like the ones we were used to back in the late 90s and early 2000s, if this is how you do an elbow rehab or ACL, and we gravitate from those, but they also serve as a frame of reference. And if more of those types of tools became available in this space, again, that would lend some legitimacy. The other comment, I know you'll be into this, Marcus, is like, what do we use? Mindfulness is hard. I skip it all the time. It's like doing my breathing and yoga at the beginning or end of a session. Like I don't want to lay around to do that. But there are techniques that we can use, and I haven't seen this done really well yet, to accelerate or lower the barrier. So for example, float tanks, right? Everybody likes a nice float recovery tank. I've started to do some research in this area. People just go in and take naps about a third of the time, which is probably beneficial. But there's nothing magic about float tank except it helps people accelerate their ability to be in a relaxed state. What I'd like to see next, although the float tank folks who develop these things, it's some kind of ethereal experience that shouldn't be messed with often, is that at that point, the person's probably ripe for focusing on attention or something like that, or breathing when they're in it. And it's hard to get them into that state otherwise. And I'd like to see some protocols or research developed around whether that would be a practical method to introduce these types of concepts to them, for which then we could wean them off and start to use them whenever they needed to in some other space.
I think one of the other things that we have to keep our eye on is the emerging threat of the post-COVID with the long haulers. We have individual firefighters as well as captains and so on who are still off on injury because of post-COVID, and talking to them, they're really struggling. And so when you make that contact, you have to have some tools in your toolbox to talk to them. And sometimes you just focus on simple things of focusing on the day, journaling, things of this nature. And it's a trust issue. You're the guy calling to check up on them to make sure that they're there. You're writing the rehab program for them. And they start to develop that bond where traditionally there was this handout there. So you have to be prepared of what the coming threat is. And right now, I'd say across the country, that's coming. And we have to be prepared to start from scratch all the way up, both physically as well as mentally, dealing with this issue.
Absolutely. Thank you. All right, I'm going to try something that Duncan tried yesterday, a bit of a quick fire. So that's pretty exciting. So we're going to go to start with for our quick fire question. What is the most overrated metric or variable that you've seen in the human performance space? So Adam, over you, mate.
Heart rate variability.
Fernando?
That's a tough one, because of the environments I've worked in. I got to pass on that one.
I'm gonna say, and I'm also copying out of this one, but I'm just gonna say any variable in like outside of context without anything supporting.
Yeah, a lack of context, which actually leads to heart rate variability because we'll just take the example of drinking last night, COVID or alcohol, right? Like I love my Aura people, but like COVID or alcohol, right? So, yeah.
Alcohol. All right. Another quick fire. We're going to flip the theme though. What is the most underrated metric, Joe?
Sleep. We don't analyze it enough because it's off duty, right? We don't sleep.
All right, I'm gonna go with grit. Not traditionally a metric, but we're working on a way to quantify it, and so I'm going with grit.
In the environment I work in, it's the opposite of, we're starting to use assessments better because there was no assessments in the past. So being able to assess and have a baseline is huge for us. So I'm on the opposite of that.
Heart rate. Like, yeah, I'm flipping it on you because like heart rate could be so useful and it's so highly correlated with HRV and we can use it to dictate training loads and everything. Like we've forgotten about it because we're simple and good at measuring it now, and it's silly. Like it has a lot to offer, especially when measuring power, which I would prefer to do in a lot of sport contexts, is really difficult or expensive.
Great, thank you. Okay, so another kind of theme that I want to explore on this panel is just around kind of artificial intelligence, machine learning. There's obviously a lot of hype in our industry about this. A lot of thought processes that we have enough data right now to do it, which maybe we do, maybe we don't. So what have you seen in this artificial intelligence, machine learning space that excites you in human performance? Is it tools, technologies, methods? I'll start with you, Adam.
Yeah, so I'm going to destigmatize artificial intelligence for everybody in here for a moment. It's like artificial intelligence doesn't need to be some kind of ethereal magic thing that is really sophisticated. It can be yes or no decision making based off of threshold. That is a form of intelligence and actually be a very good form of intelligence, like decision tree logic, right? Let's not forget that. And decision tree logic can be really complicated, but there's nothing magical about it. So the utilization of those tools and going back to logic-driven intelligence, I think is actually perfectly fine. What I'm noticing is across the I'm going to distinguish into ML now for a minute, is like we're at least coming to a consolidation of how to pre-process the data, which is data comes in, you got multivariate data of many different streams, and most people are doing a data dimensionality reduction, right? And principal component analysis is largely won out as the method for which most people as the standard are using to lower the dimensionality of your data. And what I mean by that is taking 30 variables down into maybe 4 or 5 variable constructs. We'll call them latent constructs if you're familiar with factor analysis. And that makes things much more tangible and easier to apply the machine learning techniques. And the route to make that happen used to be really complicated. You'd have to be a statistician to really pull it off. Now even a hack statistician or an old one who forgot all his skills like me can sort of do it. And I think that's a lot of a power at the consumer that has making machine learning not something that just Amazon and Google can do, but something that we can actually do and touch ourselves, which is kind of scary and fun.
Absolutely. Fernando.
Well, it's already starting to creep into the fire world, but it's creeping on the operational side, especially with large wildland fires and so on, where they're using the technology to map out fires and make fire predictions. Especially as you see in California and up in Nevada and other areas where some of these fires are 250,000 acres. And so we're excited from a standpoint of human performance that as long as we can tie that in the sense of you see how it works in fire prediction and fire behavior and how you deploying assets, well, we basically propose the question is, what do you think it'll do to help us evaluate personnel in the long run and do the human size up and come up with the ideal firefighter candidate, whether it's structure or wildland? That's the fun part as we start to embrace technology. But one of the things that you always have to remember in the community I work with, they have to see it, they got to smell it, they got to bite it, they got to drop it on the floor and go, oh, okay, now I get it. You know, sometimes they just can't conceive that this is actually capable. So you constantly have to educate and show and show and show. So we're excited that eventually it's going to end up in this environment.
Absolutely. Gillian.
Yeah, I think, we're starting to access AI in a couple of different methods for a couple of different sports. We have a project going on at the moment, taking a sensor that can, it's sampling at 200 hertz and we're getting all this data and information that we didn't have before. We send people down in a downhill course, 2 or 3 miles down with a 3,000 foot elevation change from start to finish. And really the only metric we come out with at the end used to be, time. Where did you place? With this technology, we have the ability to use AI to incorporate all of that data, learn some specifics about what's going on, make predictions, and help coaching decisions. We're a real skill and technique and tactic-based sport. And that technology can really help us make those decisions and make some big changes for our athletes. We hope to kind of apply the same technology in our free ski snowboard worlds as well, with trick identification and progression and learning. So
Awesome. Thank you. Joe.
I have to say I'm cautiously optimistic, right? Because here we are trying to look at predictive analytics associated with whether it be deployability of troops or how they're going to perform on some kind of soldier task. But we spend $1 billion studying weather that has predictive analytics that has to get after, and we only get like 70% accuracy sometimes, a 30% accuracy, and whether people still have their jobs, right? Like, still, you go outside, look up, right? Like, snow is a great one. Yes. You guys need it to survive. So cautiously optimistic, needs to be invested in, but the human and the context around it is the most important piece, right? So the contextual demands aren't built into the AI or the machine learning as far as I'm aware of, but that's not my domain of expertise. So I'm generalizing based upon what I know, the reports that come out on how accurate the weather is.
I'm so glad you brought up weather, because it's this analogy of where we are with this type of forecasting in the future. So a buddy of mine out at the University of Illinois spends a lot of time on what he calls counterfactual forecasting. So here's what happened, but if you had changed X, Y, and Z, or here's the probability of what would have happened next or could have happened. And I equate it a lot to like hurricane models, hurricane path models. Like, here are your 3 options. But what needs to happen in AI next is that we get the predictions that are coming out, but they're not transparent. Sometimes they're not transparent in their components, which I think we can solve. But for the consumer, what really becomes important is going to be not just, I predict this, here's my confidence level in that prediction that's coming out. And that's where I've been really, really critical of looking at, and I'm pretty sure AI is actually not fueling these, but any of these derivative scores that are coming off of wearables, right? Our readiness evaluation score, right? It's fine that you gave me that score. Tell me how confident you were in that score. Even like basic, like back in the day, eye tracking technology would try to give me an XY coordinate of pixels on the screen. And then the next column would be, and I was this confident that this was actually where it was, right? And that really would allow us to improve our decision-making and use that tool. And it'd be okay. What it would allow us to do is appropriately calibrate our trust in the information that we were provided, and reduce the false negative, false positive rate, because we could see the likelihood of it in front of us if they just told me how confident you were in the score. And AI would allow us to do that. I mean, the variables are there. We just don't display them to the public for whatever reason. And it's kind of folly, in my opinion.
I agree, definitely. Okay, so to round out our kind of last panel question, a bit of a curveball, didn't tell you about this one, but Adam and I were talking a little bit about kind of nutrition the other day, and how that's kind of something that's probably somewhat ignored in a lot of environments or high performance environments. So from a nutrition standpoint, what are you seeing there? Are there new supplements? Is it different methods, whether it's fasting, whatever that may be in your environment? Are you seeing anything that excites you in that environment? And I'll kick off with you, Fernando.
We kind of have to go back to the basics again. Teach people how to even shop. Again, I'm dealing with a population, and you ask them as a recruit class, and say, okay, close your eyes. Let's walk into your local grocery store. What's in front of you? What aisle do you go down? And we go back to basics. When I worked in baseball, our nutritionists used to take our Latin players and teach them how to shop, and then actually go in and do microwave meals, because they would live together in the minor league system. So we basically look at that we assume across the board that anyone coming into our organization has zero knowledge other than McDonald's, Burger King, and so on. And we know that habits, if they eat a burger on the way home, they tend to want to eat a burger every night on the way home post training. So we take advantage of that performance routine that we teach. Is at the end of the training day, what's your nutritional strategy to fuel the beast, to reload for the next day? It's part of our recovery thought process. So first, kind of clean the slate, talk about how to go shopping, what to bring, what constitutes a good meal at lunchtime, snacks, what's a good snack, what's a bad snack, and just go back to basics and build off of basics before we even talk about supplementation. A lot of organizations, first thing they talk about supplements. And again, what is that word? Supplement to what? So again, teaching people how to eat from the beginning.
Absolutely. Adam, what do you got for us?
How can we be stuck at the basics still with nutrition after all this time? Like, it's absolutely silly to me. And the food logging apps are the worst. Like, I cannot get people to do it. Even my laboratory, when we're compensating them in some way to be able to do it, I've been messing around with a mindfulness eating app recently that takes a lot of the macro issues out and just says, hey, how do you feel about the food? And it was better, but it wasn't great enough. So the lack of technological tools to help our dietitians is really unfortunate at the moment. It's probably our biggest deficit. To be perfectly honest and candid with you and selfish, what I have been paying attention to a lot is actually the way that entities like America's Test Kitchen have been systematically developing really cool recipes that can be done in 45 minutes or to an hour or whatever. And I know that that's still a barrier, but supplying this really high quality tasting food, and they're testing and retesting in this very kind of scientific methodology over and over again. So I'm attracted to that. But I was also hoping that something like the Instant Pot was going to solve all the issues that we were going to have. And you guys are laughing, but we did this, right? You sent an Instant Pot out with your athletes or whatever so they could cook nutritious meals in their hotel rooms or whatever. And that hasn't worked out really either. So I've been sort of looking for these tidbits to get people over the edge with nutrition. And I think, Colby, your idea of what we were talking about is, I can't believe that we haven't come up with a solution yet where people can find the recipes they like. They click on that recipe, it automatically generates their grocery list and orders it for them. And I've seen prototypes like that with Kroger, and maybe we'll see Amazon do it with Whole Foods or something like that, but it hasn't taken root, and I can't explain why there hasn't been a drive there, except for maybe Joe says there's no consumer market for it.
Yeah, that goes to education, right? Behaviors, choices, and habits. So what are all these devices trying to influence? Behaviors, choices, and habits. The nutritional demand, since we don't have these gadgets, right? We're a gadget-driven society and a soundbite-driven society right now, right? Everybody looks at their Twitter feed, so it's probably up somewhere on one of these screens, right? You just get the soundbite. So how do you actually then, to Colonel Bigham's point yesterday, that 70%, that pipeline that comes to us, sport gets real lucky on the elite level, right? There's good people, having good genetics, they're having good environments to keep the pipeline going. And from a breeding standpoint, I know it's kind of crass, but that's exactly what's kind of happening, right? So here in the military, we have to coach, teach, and mentor to this raw good that doesn't actually have really good raw goods. So the whole intent now is training education to influence behaviors, habits, and choices.
Absolutely. Jillian?
Yeah, I think we're in the same boat. You know, I'm not going to lie. We get a lot of 16, 17, 18-year-old kids joining our free ski snowboard teams who eat Pop-Tarts regularly for breakfast. And so we're not worrying about supplementing them. I think one of the things we'd really like to try to figure out, and if anyone in the room has a solution, let us know, but just, you know, try to work out, you know, is there a blood panel that we can utilize and then supplement based off of that actually works and has some kind of effect? Haven't seen it. You know, I think there's quite a few people out there who are trying it. They may have something somewhere else that I'm unaware of, but, you know, I know Red Bull's pours money into trying to make that solution, hasn't come up with it yet. But if we can get there with just even that basic, that would be a coup.
Absolutely. Thank you. Okay, so we are probably looking to wrap up the panel, but we will go to one question from the crowd if anyone does have a question for our panelists today. Just in the middle.
Hi. I actually don't have a question, but you can do that in an app called Yumly, and it's you create your whole shopping list, and it will connect you to a local grocer and have it all shipped to you.
There we go. Any further questions?
Hey, Adam. So you were talking about the kind of this flexible periodization thing, and maybe these readiness metrics in and of themselves aren't enough. So I guess I'm curious, how much is enough, right? Like how much can you how many of these biomarkers and physiological data markers do you need to be able to make these decisions in real time?
I don't know that answer. And that's exactly what my laboratory is setting out to do for the next like 5 or 10 years. We're revamping our research study to try to address that specific question. Because I think we're right now, we are systematically just drawing at straws and whatever we think our best SME-based decision is. And that's how we actually pick the technology that we choose to make that decision off of, whether it's biomarkers for nutrition or not. And I'm sorry, I don't have a sufficient answer for you. I don't know.
I think one of the things, depending on which type of technology you're utilizing, a lot of it's driven by the size of the group that you have to work with. And that's going to dictate, if you look at it from a group standpoint, what's their morning. For example, we use Megawave every morning in our Wildland as well as our structure academies. We want to take a broad brush look at where everybody's at from a recovery standpoint, and also help make whatever adjustments we need to do on a daily basis based upon that. Now, if we drill it down and go to the individual, then we can start to make other decisions based on that. But we also take under consideration our hydration status and so on. At the end of the day, though, it doesn't change what they have to do that day in training. So that's part of where we can make the adjustments. We'll use that data immediately. And then the other piece of that is also gives us some informational data to pass on to cadre to educate them on what they're physically or potentially going to see physically during evolutions of training. As the training goes on and goes on and goes on to the course of the day, degradation of performance starts to take place. And what we try to do is prevent that individual cadre member who's not the sharpest tool go, hey, this guy's a slug because all of a sudden I saw this. And tribal effect is everybody in the end of the day from a cadre standpoint start talking, and next thing you know, we'll bring up that individual and now everybody thinks he's a slug. And it turns out that his performance was based on the fact that he had very little left in his tank. So by educating them on what they're actually going to see based on the data that we're receiving every morning, that helps start to really work on the mentoring and development of a future firefighter.
Actually, thank you. I brought you about that they have to do what they're going to do that day. Is it Chief Josh Smith? Are you in the room? Can you describe what you guys were doing there, where you were trying to match the perceived effort that the strength coaches had been building for a workout versus that which is actually reported by the trainee? Because I think this is actually maybe the smartest way to get at this issue right now when we don't know how to use technology specifically to deal with the fluid periodization?
Yeah, so what we did was the coaches would go ahead and set what they were looking for their exertion. Once the workout was done, the student, as he was turning in his Zephyr puck, would say, "This is what my exertion was," and then we would take the data from the Zephyr puck, compare it to what the student said and what the coach wanted it to be, have a better understanding of did we actually meet that. Now, one of the challenges we ran in at the beginning is we knew it was a 3, but within the first week, especially the first Friday, which is usually when they have the hard team day, they perceived that they were a 7 or an 8. But when we looked at the Zephyr data, and we could see that you were not even close to a 7 or 8. But the nice thing about that is we would take that data and give it back to them and say, see, look how much you still had left in your tank. Mentally, you thought you were at a 7 or an 8, but the data shows you were at a 3, and that was what the coaches were trying to shoot for. So by the time you got to the 9th week, they truly knew what an 8 was, when they truly knew what a 3 was.
But you were also able to also identify in certain cases where that wasn't the case. It wasn't a misperception, that the coaches were really just off on the difficulty of some of those.
Absolutely, especially when you got into like the third workout for the day, because they're doing 3 2-hour workouts a day. And what they, if it was a run was your third workout for the day, but they're perceiving it's supposed to be a 3, that workout was a 3 for the day, but they already had a swim and a strength and conditioning session, then they would run into issues. So then it came into the issue of tailoring throughout that day what the force needs to be.
So in your world, what I was noticing, and this gets back to the multi-scale issue, is they usually have 2 levels of periodization. They have the 8 or 10 week, mostly linear like scale of trying to get these guys up. But then they actually have 3 layers. Then they have Monday through Friday or Saturday to get through. And then they have the 3-day work week. So they have 3 levels of periodization that they need to worry about. And that's what I mean by lazy periodization. Most of the time people are just thinking about one of those levels and not accommodating the other 2 or 3. And techniques like that would allow you to like hone in on that a little bit better.
Absolutely. Thank you. Okay. In a moment of time, we'll wrap this one up. So Adam, Fernando, Jillian, Joe, I had a lot of fun. So thank you very much. Big round of applause. Thank you.